Before I start this video is not for kids. It is also for adults to enjoy as well. So, with that said, please enjoy the video. Episode reviews. Now, I'll tell you guys how this series of videos work. I review an episode of a TV show, explain what I think about the episode, what I like and don't like about it, and at the end, I'll tell you what I think of it as a whole, and give it a rating out of 10. And what show are we taking a look at? It's Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends. This is my all-time favourite TV show ever since I was a kid. I used to collect books of it, including a book of the Railway series, a load of DVDs, watch them all on Milkshake with the CGI series in, collect a load of toys, everything. My first exposure ever to Thomas the Tank Engine is that I remember having a Hit Favourites promotional DVD called Top of the Tops, and that had an episode of season 4 called Thomas and the Special Letter. And when I first watched this episode, I got absolutely blown away by the engines going to a big city far away from the island of Sodor. Alright, now before this intro goes for way too long, let's review an episode of this show, shall we? Today's review, let's have a look at the episode, Thomas and the Birthday Picnic. Thomas and the Birthday Picnic is the 7th episode of the 9th season of Thomas and Friends. The Fat Controller's mother, Dowager Hat, has arrived on Sodor, and the Fat Controller asks Thomas to take him with his mother on a birthday picnic. When Thomas arrives at Knapford, he can see the Fat Controller, Lady Hat, and Dowager Hat in their best clothes. When the station masters load the picnic baskets, as well as a big birthday cake, Thomas felt astonished at what he saw. However, he sees Dowager Hat looking stern, and that made Thomas feel upset. However, Percy comes into the station and comforts Thomas, and tells him that he would have a good time, which makes Thomas feel much better. When Thomas arrives at Shen Valley, he thought Dowager Hat would love this place. Unfortunately, the Hat family didn't smile, as they saw that the field had been ploughed into mud, and the Fat Controller tells Thomas that they can't have a picnic here as it's too muddy, and that his mother is getting hungry. So Thomas sets off to look for somewhere else. He tries Lord Cannon's castle, but the Fat Controller speaks to the station master, and then turns to Thomas and said that the castle is closed for redecoration and repairs. So Thomas sets off again, but this time going too fast, making the Hat family have a very bumpy ride, and that Dowager Hat's hat falls off. The reason for Thomas going so fast is because he wanted to have another idea quickly, but the Fat Controller orders Thomas to stop because of their bumpy ride. And when Thomas finally stops, the Fat Controller sternly asks Thomas about where he's taking them now, but Thomas doesn't know and he has run out of ideas, so the Fat Controller thinks that they might have to cancel the birthday picnic. And that lunchtime has passed and his mother wants to go home. Thomas thought he had another idea when they got back to Knapford. Unfortunately, nothing dropped in his funnel. The Hat family got off the train and Thomas puffed sadly away back to Tidmouth Sheds. All the engines at Tidmouth Sheds have been hearing that Thomas's ideas hadn't gone according to plan. Percy decides to comfort Thomas once again, and he thinks that Dowager Hat might have enjoyed the cake. Then Thomas, realizing that in all of his sadness, he left the cake on board his coaches. Then Thomas starts to think on having another idea. Percy wants to whistle cheerfully, however his whistle is blocked by quarry dust. Then all the other engines started to whistle and toot, and Thomas thought it was a great idea, and Thomas starts to think on having another idea, and he whispered it to all the other engines. The Hat family are sitting sadly in the living room when the station master called to tell them that Thomas and his friends have a surprise. When the Hat family arrives at Knapford, Thomas and his friends are holding a massive party filled with party decorations, balloons, fine food, and a birthday cake. Thomas whistles at first, and then, one after the other, all the engines blew their whistles as if to sing happy birthday to Dowager Hat. This makes Dowager Hat ever so happy, and the Fat Controller congratulates Thomas and tells him it was a great idea he had, which made Thomas very happy. What can I say about Thomas and the birthday picnic? In my opinion, it's a really good episode from Season 9. It's probably my favourite episode of Season 9 in my personal opinion. Before I conclude with my final rating, here are the things I like about this episode. I like the idea of the Hat family wearing different clothes for the first time in the show. Well, except for the Fat Controller, he's been wearing clothes like this ever since Season 5. Michelangelo's saying that Thomas rocked and rolled. When I heard him say that, Duncan was stuck in my head. This scene of the Hat family having a very bumpy ride and Dowager Hat's hat fell off because of it, and that the picnic didn't spill from the baskets, and then I imagined what if it really did fall and the food really did spill out like what it did at a smooth ride. And this scene reminded me of some other bumpy rides seen in other episodes before and after it.
They were having the bounciest, bumpiest ride they had ever had, and her passengers were biffed and bumped and bounced. They spilled their tea and their buns went flying. The chickens in the vans flapped and squawked crossly. The tea was spilt.
Oh! Thomas, stop!
They also did it in the Night Garden, which I also like. I also got quite surprised to see that happen in The Impossible as well. I never knew this movie would do that, but there you go. Another thing I like about this episode is the whole party scene in the ending, and all of the engines whistling happy birthday to Dowager Hat. That was such a nice touch of this episode. But there is only one small thing I don't necessarily like about this episode. It is that it's the first episode to be ever written by Sharon Miller, aka the worst writer for Thomas. Well, I'm sure she's not a bad person. I'm not saying that she can't write anything. Well, the Nitrogen Era is just bad for her to write things, as she always writes the dialogue by rhyming and alliterating. Likewise with Rowley's Rovers from Ready Steady Build, which is the only Bob the Builder episode she had ever written. But I don't think she did a bad job writing this episode. Sure, it does have that tiring 3 strikes formula that we all know, and we all seem to come and hate at this point, especially in the Nitrogen Era, and pretty much every single episode of Ready Steady Build, and most episodes of Project Build It. Somehow, this episode has rhyming and alliteration for some reason.
I can take you to Shen Valley, sir, tooted Thomas quickly. Thomas puffed proudly into Knapford Station. Sir Topham Hatt, Lady Hat, and Dowager Hat were waiting in their birthday best, and the biggest birthday cake Thomas had ever seen. You'll have a wonderful time, peeped Percy. This was going to be the best birthday picnic ever. Thomas whooshed and wheeshed through the countryside. Annie and Clarabelle clattered and chattered. It was the perfect place for a picnic. Thomas pumped his pistons even harder to get to the other side of the island. At the castle station, the Fat Controller spoke to the station master. The castle is closed for redecoration and repairs. He rocked and he rolled. The Fat Controller, his wife and his mother were bounced and bumped inside the carriage. Thomas huffed to a halt. Don't worry, peeped Percy cheerfully.
Of course it will.
Peeped Percy. Percy wanted to whistle cheerfully, but his whistle wasn't working. Blow hard, Percy, like this, said Gordon, and he blew a long, low note.
I find toot toots better,
chirped Emily, and she gave 2 high toots. No, slow and strong is always best, tooted Henry. The Fat Controller, his wife and his mother were sitting sadly in the living room. There was bunting and balloons. Thomas gave 1 toot.
This is the best birthday picnic ever.
And here's the rhyming.
Annie and Clarabelle clattered and chattered. He huffed and he puffed, one after the other. The engines hooted and tooted, whistled and blew. Happy birthday to you.
I don't know why I never seemed to notice this as a kid, but now I actually do. Well, I feel as if I might need to stop here because I might be either ripping off James A. Williams' Tom Tober series, especially the Nitrogen era, and or Thomas and Tugsman's review on Ready Steady Build when he was on about the rhyming in Rollies Rovers. Anyways, guys, that's it for Thomas and the Birthday Picnic. Before I end this review, I'm gonna tell you how I experienced this episode. I watched the episode on the DVD, Little Engine's Big Days Out, ever since when I was really young, and I actually really liked the episode back then. And I remember the beginning scene playing on the episode selection. I liked that as well. And there we go, guys. I think I said everything I can say about Thomas and the Birthday Picnic. I quite like this episode, and I'm giving it a 10 out of 10. The concept of having a birthday picnic was a really brilliant idea, and the fact that Dowager Hat came back on the show once again since season 5 was great, and that for the first time the Hat family is wearing different clothes for the first time, except for the Fat Controller who wore his best clothes back in season 5. Thomas didn't get mad in an episode for once, which is great. The 3 strikes formula and the rhyming and alliteration did not make me hate the episode. I still think this episode is really, really great. Such a great episode for a picnic being seen for the first time, and it will be seen for a second time 1 year later. I really hope you guys enjoyed my first ever review of an actual episode of a TV show, and you can tell me in the comments what you think of this episode. Well, let's just hope copper doesn't affect this video.